Shalom Aleichem, my friends. Our talk today will be about Parashat Devarim. Anyway, the book of Devarim is the last book of the Torah, and we will say a few words. But let us remember, of course, the fact that we are now in the midst of those days before Tisha B'Av. The 9th of Av is the day, the most ominous day in the history of the Jewish people. This year, there is going to be a slight difference. Instead of falling in each day, the 9th of Av, it's going to be, the fast. We are going to have to fast on Sunday, which is the 10th of Av. It's most unusual, but it happened also last year. So this Shabbat is in fact Tisha B'Av. But on Shabbat we cannot fast. On the contrary, because according to Halakha, we have to behave with the same happiness as we have in every Shabbat. While it is forbidden now to eat meat, for example, and to drink wine, but on Shabbat you could eat as much, the kind of feast that King Solomon used to have. You're allowed, of course, up to the end of Shabbat and before, a little. And then on Saturday night, of course, we go to Shul and we begin the fast of the 9th of Av, which is on the 10th. In a way, there's not much difference between the 9th of the month of Av and the 10th. In the Talmud, in Masechet Gittin, we find that there is a machloket, there is a debate between the sages. When should we fast? The 9th or the 10th? Why? Because on the 9th, the Bet HaMikdash, the great temple of the Jewish people, the first and the second, the destruction began on the 9th. But ultimately, and eventually, it lasted until the end of the 10th. So now there was a debate. When should we fast? On the day in which it started, which is the 9th, or on the day in which it ended, the burning, the destruction. So our sages came up with their decision that it should be the beginning. That's the most crucial time, which is the 9th of Av, and that's why we always fast on the 9th of Av. But at the same time, there are a few people, because they have the possibility to do so, they fast 2 days, the 9th and the 10th. Anyway, this year, since we cannot fast on Shabbat, so automatically there is no fast on Shabbat. The fast will begin only Saturday night, going through Sunday all the way till the end. This Shabbat is known as Shabbat Chazon. The word Chazon means vision. It has to do, of course, with the Haftarah that we will read at the end of the reading of the Torah of Parashat Devarim. The words of the prophet Isaiah, who began on the first chapter of the book of Isaiah, saying, Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos asher chaza. This is a book this is a prophecy that primarily is rebuking the Jewish people for having abandoned the ways of God. And it's talking in a very harsh way towards the Jewish people by saying, Yada shor konehu v'chamor evus be'alav. Even the bull and the donkey, they know their master. Ami lo yada. But my nation, God, so to speak, says, and my nation doesn't know me. Which means they don't know God, their master. Ami lo itbonan. My nation does not ponder upon the fact that they have abandoned what we should say every day. About today, for example, those Jews who do not keep the Torah and the laws. How come they don't think about it, that they have abandoned the history of the Jewish people? And that's what Isaiah is using, very harsh expressions, sometimes exaggerated, like he likened the Jewish people to the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Unusual. And that, to my humble opinion, it's possible to explain that You cannot judge the Jew the same way you judge the non-Jew. The non-Jew did not receive the Torah, so everything is possible for him. The judgment cannot be very harsh. But the Jews have accepted the Torah. The responsibility falls upon them. And therefore, even if they do a small mistake, it is considered to be a very big mistake. Perhaps that's the reason why the prophet Isaiah used words that are unusual towards Jews who probably kept the law but made a few mistakes here and there. That's why it's called Shabbat Chazon. But it's called also Shabbat Echa. The word Echa brings into the heart a certain sadness, because Echa is the first word that begins the scroll, the prophecy of Jeremiah, who also gave the prophecy about the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem. And he began by saying, Echa Yasheva Badad. Echa means, how is it possible? How come? Yashva Badad. How is it possible? I mean, in the time of Bet HaMikdash, the Jewish people were with great honors. They were in a land of their own, that God gave them. There is no nation who has received their land from the Almighty God like the Jewish people. And that you can check in the Bible and see it repeated again and again, that I gave you, God says, I gave you the land of Israel. And unfortunately, we know what happens today. Other nations, our enemies, surrounding us and pretending to say that the land is theirs, that it's not our place, it's not our land. And many others say we are not even Jews. Do we deserve that? Perhaps. Some of us have exaggerated. Those who keep the Torah and the mitzvot are still loyal to something. But those who abandoned everything is too much. How much can be expected from this land, surrounded by so many enemies? Surrounded by the world who does not like us. It's unbelievable. Anyway, it's called also Shabbat Echa, because the word Echa is quite ominous. Now let's see what the Midrash Echa says, the Midrash Rabbah of the book of Echa, the book of Lamentations. It says there that there were 3 prophets who have used the term Echa, which means how come, how is this happening? Even today we can say Echa. How is it possible that in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and in most of the country of Israel, Jews have abandoned the heritage of their ancestors? Echa. In the meantime, we deplore the fact that we should say upon it Echa. How come? Yashva Badad. We are all alone in the world. There is no nation that likes us. They all hate us. Even our friends. We cannot trust their friendship. We know that we are hated. Even our sages said, Halacha hi Esav sameh leYaakov. Esav hates Jacob. It's a law of nature. Why? And how come? Wherever Jews went to live throughout the generations of their exile, they have brought only blessing upon the country where they were, instead of giving the proper gratitude that they deserve. In fact, they blame them for every problem, whether it is monetary or if it is any kind of sickness or any plague. It's always the fault of the Jews. That's being alone. Echa Yashva Badad. So there were 3 prophets. The first one, of course, is Moshe. In our parasha, he said, Echa esa levadi torchachem umasachem berivechem. How can I bear you by myself? You who are torchachem, they cause me to be fatigued. And Rashi explains that the Jews, that's their nature. They were surrounded with honors, they were chosen by God and everything. That's the time when Moses spoke to them. They had no other worries. So what do you think when the Jew has everything? He starts to make problems for others. I don't mean to say the Jews after the exile. I mean the first time, even in the wilderness, they had no worries. So they came up, according to the explanation of Rashi, they came to Moses and they and ask him all kinds of questions. If Moshe, for example, judges between two people, the two litigants, so the one who was at fault, was found to be at fault, would come up with his objection and things like this. And Moshe couldn't take it anymore. By myself I cannot go on like this. Torhachem, umasachem, and your weight, you are heavy. Verivchem, and your fights. But that was because the Jewish people were only in times of honor. That is true that the prophet Bil'am said that part of the blessing of the Jewish people as being disconnected from the nations. He said, Am levadad ishkon, this is a nation which has to remain by itself. Wow, what a prophecy. Coming from him, it's unbelievable that this prophecy came true. That since then we are always rejected by the nations. Unbelievable. Maybe there is a psychological reason, but at the same time does not appear to be just. No question about it. The second prophet who used the term Echa was Isaiah. Echa hayta lezona kirya ne'emana. How is it possible that that beautiful city of Jerusalem became a zona, a prostitute? The explanation of the word zona, which means, by the way, just going the other way, not sticking to the good way of God, but rather abandoning it. So he calls them zona. It's not a very beautiful expression to be said even today. And finally, Jeremiah used also the term echa. How did he say it? He said, Echa yashva badad. That's the beginning of the book of Lamentations, which we will read the night of Tisha B'Av, Saturday night this year. How is it possible that this Echa yashva badad is talking about the city of Yerushalayim, which used to be the most beautiful city according to the Talmud in the world at that time, long time ago, more than maybe close to 3,000 years ago, from the time of Solomon, was the beautiful Jerusalem. How is it possible that now, after the destruction of the temple, it became lonely, in total solitude? Echa yashva badad. The word badad means being completely alone. But the sages in the Midrash, we find that badad has a numerical value of 10. Badad, bet, that's 2. Dalet, there are 2 dalet. The first dalet is 4, the second is 4. Together we have 10. That means they have desecrated the 10 commandments that were given to them, which means they abandoned the whole Torah. Well, it is true that it happened, but we should always remember, it does not mean that all the Jews have rejected the Torah. Chas v'shalom. That's the problem. Our sages said, Israel arevim ze beze. The Jewish people are responsible for the others, and therefore, between each other we are responsible for our fellow men. Now, if he sins, it's my fault. I always said this example which happened in the time of the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish, the famed, legendary, great rabbi from Bnei Brak, one day helped with his disciples. On the day of Shabbat he was walking. In Shabbat there is no such a thing. You cannot see a car or anybody driving a car on Shabbat. God forbid. But they went And they were walking until they came to the limit when they saw that there is so much circulation on Shabbat. So he sighed terribly with sadness. So his disciples said to him, Rabbi, what's the matter? He said, I'm so sorry that to see. So they said to him, well, these people are not religious. He said, no, you don't understand. If there is a desecration of Shabbat, it's our fault also. It means that the fact that we keep Shabbat, it's not the best way. Maybe something is missing by us also, because we are responsible for them also. So who knows who's really responsible for the situation? But in the meantime, everybody has to take the responsibility to himself. Why is it that we are not anymore as we should be? We have accepted the Torah at the mountain of Sinai. We have no other way but to keep the laws of the Torah. We have 613 commandments. So it is impossible that such a thing could have happened. Unfortunately, the first destruction happened, even though after 410 years of the existence of the first temple, and then the second temple after 70 years after the destruction of the first. The Jews, a few of the Jews that were in exile in Babylon, came back, 50,000 of them, under the leadership of Yehozadak HaKohen and Zerubbabel, and Jeremiah, and Ezra HaSofer, the scribe. They left with the permission of the king of Persia, by the way, who was Koresh at the time, who, according to many of the sages, he was the son of Esther, the Queen Esther. And they came back to the land of Israel and they started to build the temple again. And that temple lasted for 420 years, but it ended up with a terrible destruction, also on the 9th of Av. And for that, of course, not only we deplore it, but we mourn for it. And we should mourn for it every night, every day. That's the reason why good Jews, they wake up at every night, in the middle of the night, after midnight, in order to recite the psalms having to do, and the prayers having to do with the fact that we lament for the destruction of the temple. And that's what keeps our hope that we will see again the rebuilding of Bet HaMikdash and the final Bet HaMikdash. So that's what we can say about Parashat Devarim, but I just would like to say the following. In the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin on page 104, it says, regarding the words Echa Yashva Badad, how is it that this great city of Jerusalem became lonely, disconnected? So the Talmud says, in the words of Rav Yehuda on behalf of Rav, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Ani Amarti, God said, as it can be quoted from the parasha at the end of the book of Devarim, Parashat Vezot HaBeracha. It says there, Vayishkon Israel betach badad en Yaakov el eretz dagan vetirosh av shama v'yarfu tal. God said, in the very beginning, I wanted to let you be by yourself. Yes, indeed, disconnected from the other nations, but where? In the land of prosperity, the land which will yield its fruits, El Eretz Dagan Vetirosh, in which nothing will be lacking anything. But instead, unfortunately, Echayash Babadad. Now, all you have to depend on your own solitude among the nations. No matter where you go in exile, you will always be harassed and you will always be disconnected from the nations. Unbelievable. Why the nations hate us? Why anti-Semitism? Why? We never understood. There is something easy to understand. We have rejected, so many of us have rejected the Torah. So many of us have abandoned the great privilege of the 613 commandments. I mean, the nations, how much can you judge the nations? The nations did not receive the Torah. They don't have all these commandments. They hardly have 7. Right? So even if we judge them, we cannot judge them harshly. Can you judge a little child for not knowing? But the Jewish people have received at the mountain of Sinai the Torah and the commandments. And we have received it with voluntarily by saying Na'aseh v'nishma. And yet it happened that so many of us have forsaken the Torah laws and everything. And even some of them say, I don't believe in God. Stupid, how can you not believe when this is very much into your heart? And that's the problem. But anyway, the judgment will have to be harsher with us. Perhaps that's the reason why the Jewish people suffered more than all the other nations. It does not mean, Chas v'shalom, God forbid, their extinction. Oh no, far from that. We are still in existence. That's our pride today. Why? Because the Jews, no matter how much they have abandoned the Torah laws, they stick to their Judaism. They are, at least, they don't want to renounce the fact that they are Jews. I have mentioned this many times before, that even the Jews who have forsaken the Torah have no knowledge of the Torah at all. They don't have the taste of the Torah in their mouth. They still will not be willing to give up on their Judaism. I am a Jew. Especially those who are in the land of Israel. Being in the land of Israel is sufficient for them. It's not enough. It's a big mistake. But at least there is hope. That there is an explanation that was said by the Maharal of Prague in the introduction to his book Netzach Israel. There is a certain statement in the Talmud in Masechet Nedarim on page 81 where it says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda on behalf of Rav said, Al ma avda haaretz. Why did we lose the land of Israel and the destruction of the temple? Of course. It's very simple, because they did not say the proper blessing for the Torah. And this is causing such a tremendous astonishment. That's why. So what happened to the 3 cardinal sins for which the first temple was destroyed? And that is, of course, murder, worshipping idols, and adultery, and illicit relations. That I can understand. But because they did not say the proper blessing around the Torah, what does it mean? That's a question that poor me, I have asked this question many times. The Maharal is asking this question, a giant of Torah. And he says, here is what was meant by the sages. It means all the sins that is said, because our sages said that the first temple was destroyed because of the 3 sins that I have mentioned. The second temple was destroyed because of vain hatred. People hate each other, jealousy. Is that all? What happened to the others? The point is this, the Maharal says. Why is it that the Jewish people who has received the Torah at the mountain of Sinai have lost its nobility of Torah by going in the ways that are so futile, so lousy, so bad? I mean, this kind of fall has a certain source. What is the source? The source is very simple. They did not stick to learning Torah. They didn't know how to learn Torah properly. If you learn Torah and you stick to it, automatically you are not going to abandon it, because the Torah is a treasury, has a taste that is unimaginable. You have abandoned it, then automatically you are going to do all the sins, and worse. That's the source. That's what our sages meant by saying, because they didn't say the proper blessing on the Torah, which is insignificant if taken literally. But what it means is that you did not learn seriously the Torah. How much more if you did not learn the Torah at all? I mentioned once, Rav Ovadia Yosef, they came to him and they asked him, those who learn Torah, do they have permission to go in Lag BaOmer to the mountain of Meron? He said to them, no, let them stay in the yeshiva and learn Torah. So the next question came up and said, what about those who don't learn Torah? Are they allowed to go to the mountain of Meron to worship in Lag BaOmer, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and so on? He said, they don't learn Torah? Bring them to me first to receive a clack, a nice slap on their face. How should we understand that? Should we understand that this is the most natural thing for every Jew, is to learn Torah? So it's unbelievable that there are so many Jews, possibly the majority of the Jewish people today, they don't know the meaning of learning Torah. Unbelievable. But what happens because we don't learn the Torah? It's very simple. So the degradation of the spirit happens little by little, and then you fall in the habit. You are used to have all the pleasures that you think are pleasures, so automatically it's difficult for you to forsake them. So what do you say? I don't believe, I'm not religious. Stuyot, nonsense. That's not that. It's habit. I told a story of a widow, a very rich widow. So one day, a very small Jew came to her. He goes from one door to another to ask for tzedakah, charity. So he knocked at her door and he said, can you give me charity? She saw him and she fell in love with him, and she said to him, would you like to marry me? I am rich, I'll take care of you, and I will give you a business. He was stupefied. He said, of course, why not? But I do have one condition, because I have the habit to go from door to door. Promise me to come with me to go and collect from door to door for a year. And after, I promise you, I will go with you anywhere. She said, okay. She went with him, to ask for charity from door to door, a whole year. After the year passed, he said to her, Madam, you have kept your promise, I am yours. And I finish with charity. I am yours. She said to him, very nice, beautiful, my husband. Just give me, please, the possibility to go. There is one more street that we can finish. Let's go and finish it and collect whatever we can. Oh my God, she's very rich, a millionaire. And she wants, that's the power of habit. That's exactly what's happening to our brothers, unfortunately. So the Torah says in Parashat Va'etchanan, next parasha, Ve'atem ad-devekim b'Adonai Elohechem, when you stick to Hashem and His ways, Hayim kullechem hayom, then we can say that you are alive today. Until today you are alive because of the merit of the Torah. It is the Torah that gives us life. Ad-devekim means sticking to each other. There is another way how to stick to each other. There is a difference in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, the difference between devek, which means glue, and tzemed. It's like some jewelry that you put on your hand. So what happens? With the glue it becomes one. 2 pages become one. Or 2 pieces that you stick to them together become one. But when you put something else on you, it's beautiful and everything. However, it's not sticking to you. It's not one. There are still 2. That's called in Hebrew tzemed. There is in the Torah, in Bamidbar, it says, Vayitzamed Israel leVa'al Peor. And the Jewish people went together worshipping the idols of Peor. He did not say devek, which means glue. They did not become one body. They stayed too. They stayed Jewish. But unfortunately, they went after the pleasures of idol worshipping that involved all kinds of illicit relations and so forth. So that's exactly the story of what's happening today when you see Jews who are not keeping the mitzvot and not learning Torah. Let me conclude with one small thing that usually people used to ask me when I was in New York. They used to ask me, you keep talking about Teshuvah, Rabbi. Teshuvah, repentance, very good, but how can you tell this to somebody who doesn't know anything about Torah or mitzvot? He has not received the proper education. So how can he start by doing repentance? He doesn't know how to start. What should he do? I always told them, to my humble opinion, the best way to start is going to synagogue. Because I have seen it with my own eyes. That many people, many Israelis, mostly Israelis, who came to our shul, not knowing what to do. They saw people putting tefillin. So after a few days they asked me if we can help them to put tefillin. They remember that they have a tefillin. I'm using the story of one of them at least, an Israeli guy who lived in front of the synagogue. So when we called him to complete minyan, so he said, I think I have a tefillin that I received on the day of my bar mitzvah, which he did not see since his bar mitzvah. But now he doesn't know how to put tefillin. We helped him to put tefillin. Little by little, when they come to synagogue, they see people praying, they try to pray whatever they can. They are given a book and they pray whatever they can. Little by little they put tefillin. Little by little they know how to put tzitzit. And then they see how we proceed, how to do all the commandments having to do with the holidays. Automatically, after a few months, they become religious. I say it because this is exactly what happened in my shul. There were many people like this. There were some people came looking like the worst kind of goy. And they became more religious than you and me. Unbelievable. So that means the Jew remains always a Jew. That's Ve'atema Devekim. We are one solid body with God. The problem is that the habit has taken so many of us to other things. So it's possible. There is hope. And this hope probably, even though the judgment has been upon the Jewish people quite harsh, versus the nations, quite harsh, but there is a logic into it. The nations have a different logic, which is nonsense. But our logic is because we have received the commandment. We have received the Torah. We know what is the Torah. We know what is to be a Jew. So therefore, the judgment should be harsh upon us. What's going to be now when the world is in grave danger? Everybody knows that today we are in danger. And today the Jewish people is in the land of Israel. The problem is we are not alone. We should have been alone, Badad. But as it was Badad in the very beginning, without any other nation pretending that this land is theirs. Unfortunately. So, we believe that it's going to be okay. But we believe also, according to the Rambam, Maimonides said it in the laws of Teshuvah, in chapter 5, he said very clearly that all Jews are going to do Teshuvah. Well, as I always say, how are they going to do it? Maybe by starting to say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. Usually a Jew says Shema Yisrael before death, or maybe when there is tremendous fear. I'm afraid of that. But who knows what will be? Jewish people has to do Teshuvah. Otherwise, who knows what's going to be? The world is in grave danger. And the land of Israel is in danger also. There are always, all the time, they are warning us. All the time, our enemies are saying things that are not to be said. All kinds of, whether it is from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, or Palestinians, or whoever. And all over the world. Jews are hated. They are, because they should be disconnected. Only there is a way how to be by yourself and in great prosperity, or to be by yourself and hated. And that's the problem. Let us hope that the days to come are going to bring great esperance, great hope for a future that is beautiful, with the coming building of the Bet HaMikdash, and the coming of the Mashiach, and the redemption will be complete for all Jews, without absolutely no one missing. Hopefully. Amen. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.